So, hello everyone. Now it's time to give you the budget lecture. So this lecture is about talking about the managerial budgeting process. And I hope I have made it as clear as possible. So I'm going to share my screen here. So, and I hope you can see everything I'm showing here now. This lecture is about budgeting as design managers might be concerned. So this is a somewhat limited overview of the management accounting principles, the budgeting process, and the life cycle cost analysis, just to give you a bit of a taste of all the things that are part of that. As always, take some notes if you like, but hey, this is a video, so you can just hold it and go back if you like. Now, management accounting principles are these here. I've found 6 different relevant points that we might look at here. Probably comfort to all is that the kind of accounting we're looking at here is only managerial accounting. And managerial accounting is something that happens within an organization. So this is not actually going to be sent out. This stays within the company, goes within departments from person to person, but it doesn't leave the company. This is an overview of the entire process that goes on typically in companies, regardless of size. All these things should be happening. And the bit that we're looking at here today, the managerial accounting, is actually mostly forward-looking accounting, which means we're not really taking into account things that were paid for, but it's more about projection. It's more about looking ahead what costs we're going to have in future. So this is the part that we're really talking about. Everything else is also going on, the stuff you see there on the left side, but the bit that really matters to us here during this lecture is the one in the red frame. This means you're working with a model-based forecasting system. So there are different models that you can use to forecast your cost. This is something you could go into at on your own time. But the main difference here is that the bit that we're dealing with is dealing with unknown cost, future cost, whereas the other bits of accounting that happen in a company are dealing with historical known cost that lies in the past. The type of accounting we are dealing with here, managerial accounting, is relevant to the managers of an organization. So this is, of course, you, the design manager, but there will be others. There will be production managers, there will be marketing managers, all those kinds of people. And they are the ones you would be writing this stuff for. So again, we are completely in the planning and decision support side of things. And it's confidential, which means your shareholders are not going to see this. The newspapers are not going to see this. This stays completely within the company. And it may even not be shown to all the managers within the company. So it's, in a way, top secret, if you like. You can keep it that way. And it really only reflects the needs of the management. So this isn't really hardcore accounting stuff we're talking about here. This is about reflecting the needs of managers, including the design managers, in order to explore what might be needed in the future. So here you have the full overview. Now, there are 3 areas of management accounting, and I'll quickly talk you through those. This is according to the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. These 3 areas are strategic management, performance management, and risk management. The strategic management is all about advancing the role of the management accountant as a strategic partner in the organization, by which we mean it's all about forecasting and planning. Then there's a performance management, which is about developing the practice of business decision-making and managing the performance of the organization. This is then used for a thing also known as performing a variance analysis every now and then. And then there's the risk management, which is all about monitoring the costs. So as soon as some red warning signs are popping up because you're going over budget, then you're basically managing your risk because you're taking into account that you're reaching the end of the money, right? So this is about contributing to frameworks and practices for identifying, measuring, managing, and reporting risks to the achievement of the objectives of the organization. Right, let's look at the actual tools that we would be using as design managers when we are doing our management accounting ourselves. There are these six different tools I've found. And I'll talk you through them one by one. But just so that you know, there are 6 of these. Methodologies of management accounting. This one is called ABC, the activity-based costing, which is just another way of saying you list all the things you'll do and what they cost, and that's it. Then here's a thing which is hilariously named in a way no one can understand, Grenzplankostenrechnung, GPK, and here, ironically, it's there in order to make cost accounting information understandable to all. Would you believe it, with a name like that? But anyway, what it's about is to make sure that your terminology that you're using is understandable by the recipients who are getting this thing that you're writing. So when you're writing, for example, as a design manager about Ebbert and clay and yellow foam, that means nothing to the marketing people or anyone else. So you would use a different word to describe what it is, namely modeling supplies, right? So it's a way of translating what you're talking about for the sake of your colleagues from another department so that they understand you. There's this thing here called lean accounting. Lean accounting is something you can probably do more easily the bigger the organization is that you're working in, because it means that you might omit certain things. You might not be talking about certain things because somebody else has already done that. Now, the smaller your company is, the less likely you'll be able to do this one, because the smaller your company is, the more detailed your accounting will need to be, unfortunately. Here's a thing called resource consumption accounting, RCA, and it's cool because it's basically software supported accounting. And it might be harder the first time, but every year you do it, it becomes easier, not because you're getting used to it so much, but because the information that's in it can roll over and you can then just modify or accept as is. Then there is an interesting thing called throughput accounting, which sounds a bit faster than it is, because really what you're doing is you're taking into account the effect of things on other things on your list. So let's say, for example, that one thing on your list is the coffee, And another thing is employee performance. Well, they both have their cost, but perhaps the more coffee you put into the game, the less overtime you need to pay your employees because they get it done before the office closes, right? So this is how one thing could affect another, and that's called throughput accounting. Similar, but not the same, is transfer pricing. And transfer pricing means simply that the cost that occurs in one department of the company could be partly carried by other departments as well, which is a nice thing and can be a necessary thing. And it may come as a surprise to you, but within big organizations, it's quite common that the cost of things is shared when it affects several departments at the same time. It reduces the financial pressure on each department. Okay, now we've gone through the hard part. Here comes something slightly lighter, the actual budgeting process. The word budget, by the way, just to amuse you, is something I found to be based on the old French word budget, which none of my French students have ever heard. So I don't know how true this is, but apparently during the times of the dinosaurs in France, a lady's purse was called a budget, a place where they carried their money. And now we call a budget based on that. And this is really an organizational plan, or a plan that is stated in monetary terms. So it's a money plan, right? What we plan to do with the money. So a budget can do a few things for us. It can tell us, hopefully, how much may be earned when we take on a project. It hopefully should tell us how much it may cost us to do that project. It should also tell us how much money is left when we're done, and thus how much we can spend on that project or other things. And we do it in order to control our resources. Resources are all sorts of things. They are the money, but they're also the tools, the space, the people, the time. So we use this to put a number on our resources. We're also doing it in order to communicate our plans to other managers so that they can make their plans as far as they're affected. If there are other managers working under us or next to us or above us, this plan, this budget can also motivate them to write their budgets and their plans. Once the project is over, or at the end of the year, we can use it to evaluate the performance of managers, including our own. So we can check, have we actually made use of the money that we were given? And have we made use of it in a good way? Have we got something to show for the money we spent? And then we can also use this very easily to make visible the performance of the company. If we say we're spending 10 million a year on sustainability stuff, well, that could mean it's well spent. Well, we don't really know that because that's 0.4. Still, to the outside, that sounds good, doesn't it? Now, as far as we're concerned, as designers or design managers, there are these 4 different budget types that we sometimes do. One that we use is the cash flow budget. Cash flow budget is a budget we have just to make sure that everything always ticks over. So if you start your own company, that's pretty good to have, because you don't want to find yourself stranded, unable to pay people and leverantörer och så vidare. Then we have a marketing budget, which is of course good to have if you're going to go public with your stuff. You always need one for promotion, for advertising. The cost of this has gone down a lot since people have gone digital, but still you've got to have it. Then there's a project budget, which is of course the main budget because we use it to get our stuff done. And then we have an expenditure budget, which is the one that pays for company lunches and bus fares and flights and anything that you might be doing. Right, so much for the internal nitty-gritty that you might encounter on your desk. Here's something more philosophical, the life cycle cost analysis, which I find very amusing, called either whole life cost or life cycle cost. And I've made a few examples here of where that can take us. Let's say you're buying a piece of cheese. Here's a Gruyere. And the retail price is $4.99, quite reasonable for a cheese. And most people would just buy it, eat it, and that's the end of it. But then you have a possibility that somebody else might buy this cheese, eat it, and discover that they have severe lactose intolerance and need over-the-counter medication immediately to deal with the effects of it. And before you know it, the cost of that cheese for that person has gone up to almost $20. So that is how external factors can change pricing in the final effect. There's a tragic example here from the car industry, the Ford Pinto. And the Ford Pinto is a vehicle which had a design flaw, not because it looked bad, but because it tended to burst into flame if it was rear-ended, which means not whenever, but often when somebody crashed into the back of it, the fuel tank would rupture, gasoline would spill out, and the vehicle would burst into flames. And every now and then, people got killed when that happened. So 27 people actually were killed due to this design problem. And Ford then started to think, how can we solve this issue? And the accountants came up with two scenarios. They said, well, we can either redesign the vehicle, which is $22 million, or we do nothing and simply pay the families of those who die, which is probably going to cost about 20 million. So it's slightly cheaper to just pay people and leave the car design alone. Now, as you can imagine, that when that came out, wasn't making Ford much more popular and actually cost them a lot more than the 20 million than you see here, because their reputation was basically shot for quite some time until people forgot about the Ford Pinto. It took a while. So that leaves us to ponder these four words here that describe the whole life cost or the life cycle cost. And they are the private cost, the external cost, the social cost, and the mysteriously named psychic cost. The private cost is simply what you pay, and that's it. So that was the first scenario we saw, $4.99 for a piece of cheese. End of story. Then there's the external cost, which takes into account all sorts of other things that are part of this. So this could be the cost of taking the cheese to the supermarket. This could be the cost of factory workers driving to the Ford factory to build the car. What do they pay for their fuel and so on, and their lunches? So that's the external cost. The social cost is the sum of the first two. So this is what everybody pays, both the person who buys the cheese and the person who makes the cheese and transports the cheese and sells the cheese. All those costs are the social cost. And then we have the psychic cost, which is the cost that is incurred by psychological stress, such as the stress that the people might have felt whose family members died in these cars and how that affected them. or the stress somebody might feel who discovers by eating the Gruyere that they are lactose intolerant and take up drinking just to comfort themselves and spend lots of money on whiskey for the rest of their lives just to forget that they're lactose intolerant. So that's the psychic cost. And that takes us to the end of the lecture. Thank you very much and all the best.